Creed 3 has recently dropped into cinemas, meaning it is now time to rank all 9 Rocky and Creed movies. This is the first entry into the franchise since 2018, and with this is my first watch through of the entire series. I'd seen the first Rocky and all the Creed films, but this is my first time watching through all of them, so I'm here to rank them after that viewing. As this is such a big franchise and has a lot of fans, whether they're diehard fans or casual ones, everyone's lists are going to be very different, so if mine's not the exact same as yours, please let me know what yours is down below. You probably won't agree with mine, but that's the reason people make these videos, to put their opinion out there, whether they're the same or not. So without further ado, let's get into my ranking of all 9 Rocky/Creed films. I said in my intro that we probably won't have the same list, but I think most of us can agree that Rocky 5 is the worst film in the franchise. The script in itself is lackluster to say the least, and with that comes crazy choices from characters that we know who wouldn't make those choices, and just in general led to some poor acting, most noticeably from Sylvester Stallone. Don't get me wrong, I love him and I think he's great as Rocky, but this film, he isn't that great, and even Stallone himself has kind of disowned this film. This whole franchise is built upon Rocky starting from pretty much nothing. He's always been a humble person but had nothing to his name, but we see him rewarded with that rise to fame, yet he still remains humble. Here, while remaining humble, they decide to make him broke again for no apparent reason. It just didn't feel like we were going in a new direction with this franchise, where there were other things involved where we were. This film wasn't doomed from the start because it has some good ideas, which are so good that they've actually been used in films since this one came out. The mentor side of things from Rocky, which has been used in the Creed films, the family struggles, which are used in Rocky Balboa. But here, they're just executed so poorly, and they really struggle to juggle them amongst each other. I mentioned the script making characters seem unlike themselves, and that goes for Rocky here, who isn't unlikable, but just feels so bizarre to how he's acted in the previous 4 films. It's common knowledge that he was never the most educated person ever, but here they make him ridiculously dumb and gullible. It just felt like they were making fun of him rather than actually using this as a serious storyline. So this film had good ideas, but the execution and the script were just extremely poor. After Rocky 5, there is a big jump in quality up to this next spot, which is Rocky 4. This is actually a difficult one to rank and give a score to, as it has many good things at the expense of cutting corners. What I mean by that is this is probably the most rewatchable film on this list. From a filmmaking perspective, it's probably not the best made. If you think of 80s cheesiness in a film, this is it right here, because this one embraces the campiness of that time and produces such a fun film to watch. From the tone to the fact that it's the USA versus the Soviet Union in a boxing match, from the over-the-top dialogue and characters and the excessive amount of montages, this film is just a lot of fun, but as I said, at the expense of good filmmaking. It's a film where you're not required to focus at all. I mean that literally. You can turn your brain off and just consume this film, and you'll have a smile on the face by the end. I always feel it with these Rocky films where I myself want to get up and start working out, but this is one of the best to do it in the franchise. I don't know what it is about it. I think it's just because I'm already in such an active mood while watching it from laughing so much, or I don't know what it is, but nonetheless, despite it not being a well-made film, it is still very fun. High hopes, he had high hopes. After 16 years away, Rocky returned to the franchise with a film which was much closer to the tone of the original. You know, since the original, they've slowly become more campier and ridiculous, but this one went back to that extremely grounded root. And the emotions were at an all-time high thus far, as you feel the lows of this character who's lost so much and wants to relive the past, essentially. It's just one of those which makes you take a look at yourself and makes you want to embrace what you have now before you can't enjoy it as much later on. They use this time jump well to highlight what Rocky would be like in certain scenarios after such a long time away, where he's grown older. And while they did some great things with that, there were also some odd choices. The structure of the story felt quite messy at times, I found, and there's like this relationship between Rocky and Marie. Marie being the grown-up version of the girl that was in the original Rocky, and While it's never explicitly said that it's romantic, you still get that awkward romantic tension between them, which kind of felt a bit maybe uncomfortable. And on top of this, Rocky's opponent, Mason Dixon, is perhaps the most forgettable in the entire franchise. Rocky Balboa is certainly best with its emotional moments rather than its actual fighting, because I think this is actually the worst fight choreography in the entire franchise. But nonetheless, we're treated to a wide range of acting skills from Sylvester Stallone, which really laid the groundwork for these Creed movies. Following on from Rocky 1 and 2, Rocky 3 takes a new approach with that more campier tone. This is where the franchise really started to go towards that more than a drama. Although it's different, it has a new appeal to it where it's more charming with this campiness. I don't know if it would work well if you made that today, but as of when this was made and watching it now, it really is a product of its time, which holds up quite well. And because of this tone, Clubber Lang acts as the ideal opponent to kind of essentially elevate that campiness. But what you'll find many will praise about this film is the relationship between Apollo Creed and Rocky Balboa. After being foes in the first two films, it's quite refreshing to see them partner up and trying to achieve the same goal for once. That relationship really does elevate this film to a new level. While the campy elements are very fun, they come at the expense of taking the dramatic moments seriously, because those just didn't hit as hard as they should have. And I think it was because you could go from a very silly moment just straight into a serious one, and it's kind of hard to adapt. But nonetheless, I still had fun with Rocky 3.
Who the fuck wants what with me? Hardest out, and I say that reluctantly.
From here onwards, I found it very hard to rank these films. As I slowly go through them, you'll see that the scores are very, very close. But nonetheless, I fell upon Creed 3 coming in at this spot. For the first time in this franchise, Sylvester Stallone doesn't appear as Rocky in any sort of way. And while you expect him to leave a big gaping hole, Michael B. Jordan manages to both direct and lead without him needed. And no disrespect to Sylvester Stallone, but the way it's executed, you don't actually notice his absence for the most part. The core elements of this film are cliche like they have been in most of the other entries, but there's just enough to it that makes it feel unique, and that main element is how personal the dynamic between Adonis Creed and his opponent in this film, Damien Anderson, actually is. We've never had two opponents who are linked through childhood together, and it just felt so personal and made everything much more tense. Shortly after dominating the villainous role in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, Jonathan Majors once again knocks it out of the park with his performance as Damien Anderson here, producing one of the most menacing villains in this franchise, if you can call them a villain. But he is certainly up there, and he is so well written as well. As always with films in this franchise, there is a big fight at the end, and this one is perhaps the most unique as it incorporates elements from anime, which I didn't think I'd say. Michael B. Jordan expressed his love for anime and brought some of those elements into these fight scenes, and they made them very unique and quite refreshing, therefore an enjoyable experience. I really enjoyed Creed 3, however, there were some issues with it in terms of plot holes, which just made me hold back from enjoying it and as much as I could have, as I just couldn't ignore them because they felt like they could have easily solved some problems. But nonetheless, I could watch so many of these Creed films. They're really consistent, and that's the case with this one. Rocky 2 had the job of following up one of the most influential films of all time, and I think it did so very well. The formula of the narrative is very similar to the original, however in this case it feels like a natural continuation of the Rocky character. I like how they highlight his sudden rise to fame, where he doesn't really know what to do and how to deal with situations where he makes wrong choices or just straight up feels like a fish out of water. It's portrayed in a fascinating way which kind of makes Rocky feel somehow even more sympathetic. As great as the final fight was in the original, I actually think Rocky 2 surpasses it, producing a very thrilling, intense match. I feel like my enjoyment of Rocky 2 is a lot higher than others, because I personally feel like if they kind of even out the pace a bit more, the film, they cut out maybe a few pointless plot lines, this one could have been better than the original. A very random fact, but the first film I watched in this entire franchise was Creed 2. Not even Creed 1, Creed 2. I saw it in cinema and I really enjoyed watching it then. On rewatch, I still have the same feeling. It continues the strong themes of family and legacy from its previous entry into this one. However, it doesn't just apply it to Rocky and Creed. They also apply it to the Drago family, taking probably the most silliest villain from one of the most silliest films of all time and really grounding it was quite a shock to see, and I think this film does it fantastically. You know, in Rocky IV, Ivan Drago was kind of pictured as this robotic fighter, but here he's given heart and a new dynamic with his son Victor, which I thought elevated this film to a new level. So much so that I actually felt like I was rooting for them at some points because their arc was very compelling in this film. Adonis himself also goes through a lot of mental and physical struggle in this film. Physically, where he suffers his biggest beating in his career, and also mentally where he's kind of getting a bit up himself with all his success. The latter made him quite unlikable for a large portion of this film, but given the circumstances, I think it did make sense ultimately. The fight scenes are fantastic, really engaging you, some of the best in the entire franchise. I did find this was a bit of a downgrade on the predecessor, which we'll talk about in a bit, as there were some big things which are kind of just breezed past in favor of getting to the Drago plotline. So what I found was it felt more like a third film in a franchise rather than the second, as it just felt like there was some missing context in between this and the first film, but nonetheless still a very good time watching, and as I said, I wouldn't complain if they kept making a load of Creed films. I feel like I'm going to get absolutely rinsed here, but I actually have Rocky in at second place. Look, I know many people grew up with this film. I didn't, and I'm not saying that's why it's not in my first place, but as great as it is, I just didn't resonate with it as much as with the other film that's on this list. There's no denying that this film paves the way for essentially any sports film to come, because it sets the standard of both executing the sport side of things well and also the character that is pursuing that sport. The film is extremely grounded, and you see that through the character of Rocky, who is just so likable. It's hard not to like him. The title is not misleading in one bit because you don't actually see that much boxing in here. It all kind of culminates in the final act, but it is solely focused on Rocky and his life that he's living and his slow rise to fame. The story of a nobody getting his shot at the world title is very fascinating, but the way it focuses in on Rocky's lifestyle is so much more inspiring. The side characters also add an interesting dynamic, whether that is a close friend, a girlfriend, or even his opponent. At the end of the day, Rocky does feel like a real life story because it's so grounded, dealing with so many emotions and just capturing such a distinct lifestyle that it's hard not to enjoy, but unfortunately, I enjoyed a film on here just a bit more than this one.
Time it'll come, they doubt me. Had to keep them OGs around me.
To be honest, I don't even know if anyone's stuck around, if I've already annoyed them enough that they've clicked off the video, but Creed is my number one pick, and I just felt so much more emotion from it. Look, I really enjoyed Rocky, but I did enjoy this one a bit more. However, I think Rocky really sets the formula and the elements which make this such a great success. Not just because of the character Rocky, but just some of the things it has done prior. This film just borrows from it and honestly goes to the next level. Rocky does return, however, in a more mentor role, more so than Rocky V, and he trains Adonis Creed, who's played by Michael B. Jordan, and I must say, instantly, his performance is captivating. This is a fresh take on the franchise, but it still embraces everything that came before, whilst also taking it into a new direction. Something which does initially anger fans, but I feel like is the right decision to keep a franchise alive, and Creed is the prime example of that. It creates new characters and new storylines, but still has those elements from previous films and those characters, and it just all comes together so well. It works so well that you don't actually need any prior knowledge of the franchise to enjoy this film, but anything you do know does heighten it. Creed takes the best qualities from this franchise with how grounded it is, the family drama, whether that be for Rocky himself or the newcomer Adonis Creed, just the struggle, the loss, everything is perfected here. And not to mention, the fight sequences are fantastic. Ryan Coogler does a brilliant job of paying homage to the franchise, yet taking it into a new direction, something which has turned out to be a great success, not just because it's top of my list, but it spawned a mini spin-off franchise within this Rocky franchise. I have a lot of love for this film, as I do for a lot of the other films on this list, but this one comes in at first place for me. If you are still here, I can only apologize for not having Rocky at number 1. Probably is one of my more controversial picks in my entire channel's history, but nonetheless, it is how I feel and I wouldn't want to lie to you guys. As I mentioned in the intro, please let me know what your ranking is down below, and while you're there, if you wouldn't mind liking and subscribing, that would also mean a lot. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video.